Hey again, folks. This is a video for CCNY Music Theory Fundamentals, and we're talking still about meter, chapter 3 in your textbook, reviewing that chapter. This is part 2, and we've already discussed the kind of the fundamental elements of meter, simple meter. I'll have another short video that discusses compound meter. Normally that's a separate chapter. We're not gonna use it very much. It is important to know, but I'll sort of pack it in to this chapter. But duple, triple, quadruple meter, we've listened to some examples and gone over that. But now we need to look at individual pitches and how things are organized through rhythmic notation. And of course, notation is just the word for how music is written down, and musical notation, that's what we call it. That's the language of music. And if we look at your textbook, it says here right at the beginning, when you listen to the music at the beginning of the chapter, you notice that some pitches lasted longer and others were shorter. These are durations. The patterns of longer and shorter durations in music is called rhythm, right? And so that's rhythm itself. We all have heard this term. We intuitively understand what rhythm is when somebody talks about rhythm, but it only exists because some sounds, some pitches, are shorter or longer in relation to other sounds. If every sound was the exact same duration, and duration is just length, right? If every sound was the same duration, then man, that would be a really strange world to live in. But, right, so that sound, but is longer than the words that came after it. But is longer than this word and that sound. So the combination of these shorter and longer durations is really, I think, probably the most interesting part about music, or at least the most corporeal, the most bodily. The thing that really moves us or moves our body when we listen to music, or makes us bob our head or tap our feet or clap our hands, is the rhythm more than anything else. Okay, but of course rhythm happens in concert with pitch often, unless it's just drum music, and even drums are pitched a lot of the time. So let's look at what we're talking about with rhythm and issues of duration, rhythm, and how they're organized and how we read them. So take a look at this example that the book gives, Amazing Grace. Let's play this.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
So notice, before we even pick this apart, what is our meter? It's a simple triple meter, right? I'll sing it a little faster. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's our pulse. Our pulse is this clapping, and it's repetitions of 3. It's not 2, it's not 4. So that tells us it's a triple meter. And then if we divide these individual pulses, these individual beats, tap, 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 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. And each of those pulses feels naturally divided into 2, not 3, not 4, or anything else. So that tells us it's simple. And if this simple versus compound thing is still a bit confusing, you'll get the hang of it, I promise. What's really central, really most important, is that you can distinguish between duple, triple, quadruple meters. And that comes pretty naturally to a lot of us. But it can take some work for some, for sure. Now, what's going on when you look at this? So look at the difference, the anatomy of this example that's shown here. we've got these words like quarter note, half note, eighth note, beam, bar lines, measure number, measure or bars. So let's look at these individually, and you'll have spent time hopefully already looking at this. So there's the note head, okay? We know this. This is this it's either dark, it's filled in like this first note, right, above the word letter A. And so, and this is the note D. Don't confuse that. I'm not saying this is the note A. It's just the syllable A. So this note D has a dark head. This note G has a hollow head, right? Hollow note head. And so every note head will be either hollow or filled in, right? There's only two possibilities for what a note head will look like. Now, it may have a dot next to it. It may have a stem. So let's go backwards from this. So a note head will either be hollow or filled in, two options, right, for note heads. It will either have a stem, and that's what this thing next to the note head is. It will either have a stem or it won't. All of these notes in this example in Amazing Grace have stems. And there's only one duration that doesn't have a stem, and it's called a whole note. We'll look at that. So you have note heads, filled in or hollow. You have either stems or non-stems. And then you have beams. And this is a beam here. Notice there's only one or two notes that have beams. And beams, what beams do is group different notes together. And the more beams you have, this is very important, the more beams you have, the faster duration those pitches are. So this note, maze, right? Those have no beams. These two notes here, this B and this G, are beamed. So these are a shorter duration. They're faster than the others. If you take this song, right? Right? So right there, it's going to be faster. See how that in grace, short, long, short, long. So that duration for those two notes here, B and G, is much shorter than the note before it and the note after it, which are the same duration. And we'll flesh all this out briefly. So there we go. Beams, stems, in order. Note heads, stems, and beams tell us everything we really need to know, and dots, which we'll get to, about the duration of a single note. Now, what's important though, and this was a important innovation that happened, roughly 700 years ago, 600 years ago. Yeah, closer to 7. Anyway, is these measure lines. So what we don't have is just a string of notes with beams and stems that aren't organized. Each group of them have these little lines you see here, right? I can't click on it, but there's a line here, there's a vertical line here, there's a vertical line here, and a vertical line here. Notice that these lines are not attached to notes, so they're not stems, they're not beamed, they don't interact with the actual pitches at all. They are dividing lines. They help us read this music in a way that is very helpful, right? That's why they're there. So these are called bar lines. See, it says it there, or measure lines. Sometimes I'll refer to them as measure lines or bar lines. And what they do is divide, see, I've highlighted this here. The bar lines divide the staff into measures or bars. So bar lines, measure lines. divide the music into bars or measures. So bar and measure are completely synonymous. They are the exact same thing, and I'll use them pretty interchangeably. Now, what's really important to understand here is that this meters, this time signature, which we'll talk about, these numbers, weird numbers stacked on top of each other, a 3 and a 4, that will tell you how much time can be within a single measure, no less and no more. That's what's great about this, and what's easy is that whatever time signature you have can never be violated. Now, this first note here is what we call a pickup, and I kind of wish they would have chosen an example without it. So sometimes when the music starts and when it ends, you have a violation of this rule, and that the reasons for that aren't really worth getting into now. But all the music in between the first measure, or the first note you see, first couple notes, and the end cannot violate this time signature. And what this is telling us is that there's 3 quarter notes, right? The pulse is at the bottom, and how many per measure at the top. Pulse at the bottom, and how many per measure at the top. That's our ratio with this 3-4. Let's look a little more. So the example features 3 of the most common note values in music: the quarter note, the half note, and the eighth note. So again, quarter note to start, half note right after that, and then these 2 beam notes are eighth notes. We talked about beams and flags. Normally, if we were in person, I would spend a good amount of time having you write these out. And I still want you to do that, but I'm not really there to check on you. But the biggest mistake I see early theory students make, one of the biggest, is writing out note heads, beams, flags, stems, all of this anatomy of music. And while it may seem arbitrary, it makes a difference if you ever want to write out a piece of music for someone, whether you're in the studio and want the pianist to play this certain lick or phrase or groove, or you're a composer, obviously. Writing these things correctly are important, if for no other reason than it shows it shows your musicians or your composers or producers that you know what you're doing. If you show up and things look really poor, if your flags are on the wrong side of the stem, for example, look down here. So this is wrong, right? Flags are always supposed to go the opposite way of the note head, right? And also stems are supposed to go to the right, right? And so if we were to circle, I'll show you the answer here. So this is circle the incorrectly notated stems, flags, and beams. This first one is wrong for 2 reasons, and here's the right answer. The stem needs to be on the right side of this note head. So when stems go up, they're on the right. When they go down, look at this second one here. When they go down, they need to be on the left. And flags always point to the right here, right? So this flag is pointing out away from the note head. Sorry, to the left. It's not necessarily that it's away, but it's to the left here, and it should be like this here. But so know this, and your workbook exercises will make you identify incorrect note stems and beams and flags, but it can't really make you draw them yourselves or notate them yourselves, but it's worth doing some practice on. Okay, so that's flags and beams. Let's go down here. So the eighth notes have a single beam, as we saw right here with Amazing Grace. If you add 2 beams, as I said, that makes things faster. So this is, it's twice as fast as eighth notes. These are called 16th notes. Notes with 2 beams are 16th notes. They may be written with either 2 beams or 2 flags, and they last half as long as 8 notes. So they're twice as short, if you want to think of it that way. So listen here. What? Let's try that again. They use these examples that kind of slow down at the end, but those are 16th notes. So if I were to play this, for example, let me grab my guitar. So we have, right? So that's as it's written, 16th notes. If I were to play this as 8 notes, then it would be twice as slow, right? So it'd be. So that would, if this were written as single beams instead of double beams, right? Double beams are twice as fast. That's 16th notes. This would be 8th notes. Right. So that's the distinction there. And just for the sake of it, if I were to do quarter notes, I won't even do the whole thing, but you get the idea. So that's the difference in duration there. Now, this chart on example 3.7, chart of rhythmic durations, one of the most important things to memorize, to know, to have, taped to your, I can't say, your desk or your home office or your laptop or whatever. Something that you need to just learn quickly, and it's not that hard, is this chart of rhythmic durations. You see how things funnel and are subdivided durationally. So we have our longest duration here is a whole note. A half note is half the speed of a whole note, right? So whole note breaks down into 2 half notes. So there's 2 half notes within the same duration of a whole note. Quarter, and notice the math here, right? There's whole, half. If you take a pie and split it in half, there's 2 pieces. If you split it into quarters, there's 4 pieces. 4 pieces within the span of 1 whole note. 8 notes, there's 8, right? Within a whole note. 16th notes, there's 16. Now, don't always just relate this to whole notes. It's important to remember how they relate on a smaller level. So there's 4 16th notes within 1 quarter note, right? 4 16th notes within 1 quarter note. Or you can think of 8 16th notes within a half note, 2 16th notes within an 8th note, and so on. So if we take, let me grab my metronome. A metronome is just a device that keeps tempo for you. So I've got this metronome thing here clicking on quarter notes. Maybe I should do, why don't I do it slower? So let's say that click is a whole note. Right, that's a whole note. Right? So if each one of these clicks is a whole note, then a half note would be 2 within each click, right? So it would be, here's a whole note, then ta, 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 half, 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 half. Look at the screen here. So the click is this, half, 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 half. Quarter note will be twice as fast as those half notes. All right, so this is a whole note clicking. Quarter notes, ta, 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 ta. I'm slowing down and speeding up. I'm messing up, but you get the idea. Ta, 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 ta. That is a quarter note. Now it's going to get really tricky. If we're going to do 8 notes, so this click is a whole note. 8 notes would be 4 within the span of 1. Ta 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 ta. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 16ths is so fast I can't even do it, right? But usually what happens, how do we count music? We did this in the video from part 1. We feel things not in whole notes. We feel music for the most part, so far, the pulse is these quarter notes, actually, right? If we go back and listen to, what was something we listened to last class? Sorry, I'm just opening my Spotify here. Oh yeah, we listened to that heart tune. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So if that's our pulse, those are quarter notes. Let's look back at the book here. So this, quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarter, quarter, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say we have that pulse going, 1, 2, 3, 4 of quarter notes. What would half notes sound like? I'll let you think about it. So here's quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ta, ta. Half notes are half the speed, are slower than quarter notes, right? So it would be 4. Ta, 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 right? So I'm singing one sound for every 2 quarter notes. What would a whole note sound like? 2, 3, 4. Ta, ta, right? Now, 8 notes, remember, are shorter durations, so they move faster than quarter notes. And remember that subdivision, the beat division, is often 8 notes. So if this is quarter notes, 3, 4, then 8 notes would be this. Ta, 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 ta. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? Now 16th notes are even faster than 8 notes, twice as fast as 8 notes. So this is our quarter note. Again, what are 8 notes? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There's 2 8 notes for every quarter note. How many 16th notes are there for every quarter note? 4. So this is quarter, 2, 3, and 16ths. Ta 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 ta. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Okay. So that is our beat subdivision, or chart of rhythmic durations, the most important durations you're going to deal with. And here's a little summary that your book does. Let's look at these try it exercises, and I'll do a couple of these with you right now. So it says, in each blank, write the value of the note above. Whole, half, and those aren't intervals. It's kind of annoying that they use that here, but it should be clear enough. That whole steps, not half steps, but durations. A whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, or 16th note. Okay, so let's listen first.
Many were the wild notes a merry voice would blow.
Okay, and it gives you the first one, this note above. This A here is an eighth note, right? What is this next one? Wild. Okay. Remember that we have our components, note heads, beams, and stems, okay? So here we have a filled in note head with a solid stem and no beams. There's no dots next to it or anything like that. Get to that in a second. So is it a whole note? No, because whole notes, remember, are hollow note heads with no stem. Is it a half note? No. Half notes are hollow note heads with a stem. Quarter notes are filled in note heads with a stem and no beams. That looks like the leading candidate. Eighth notes have beams or flags, right? Remember that they can have flags, which we saw up here. Here's a flag. Flags here. But this example has no flags and no beams. And of course, 16th notes have multiple beams and multiple flags. So what is the answer here? That's right. This would be a quarter note. Okay. This is an interesting one. Her, the word her here, the last pitch of this measure is a G. Look how this rhythm notes her. These two words here, notes her. There's a beam, a single beam, but then at the end of it, it connects to this G, and there's this little leftover beam here sticking out with no partner. So that still counts as a double beam. That's important to remember. That beam, this top beam connects, right? This one does not. So this note, this G, is a 16th note, not this A. This G is the only one we're concerned with. This G has two beams. Don't worry about where this beam goes, the fact that it has no friends. There's two beams attached to this G, filled in note head, 16th note, right? This next one, solid note head with a stem and a single beam. Single beam is what? That's right, an eighth note. And then lastly, a hollow note head with a stem and no beams. Hollow note heads will not ever have any beams. And so that's a half note. So what did we say? Quarter note here, 16th note, eighth note, half note. Let's make sure we're right. Quarter note, 16th note, eighth note, half note. And then you should do some of these on your own as well. All right. So I think for now, that is it for part 2 of chapter 3. I'll come back with part 3 and we'll talk about these time signatures, meter signatures. We'll get into rests also, dotted note heads as well. Okay, so for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Email me with questions as always. Take care.